Seeing as you have experienced a lot of different settings, you've experienced work with a lot of different companies, a lot of different people. You've worked with a lot of people. In terms of marketing, what are some of the top trends that you are seeing now in terms of messaging and communication?
People are always, I think for the past couple of years, more so now, they're pushing storytelling as being really, really important. There's certainly different ways to tell a story. You've got traditional forms, written language, but you can also certainly tell a story solely through visuals. There's even experiential storytelling. Experiential marketing, again, really big trend.
What would that be, for instance?
So people these days are really trying to sort of get people to experience their brands in other ways. So, for example, just as an example, let's say Hermes, right? You can certainly go into an Hermes store, and you can buy a scarf or look at a bag. You interact with the staff, and that's one way to engage with the brand, right? But let's say Hermes opened up, a pop-up store, and they took over a temporary space, and instead of selling their products at that store, they wanted you to learn about maybe the heritage of Hermes or why craftsmanship is so important to them. They can do that in a way where they're not necessarily selling you anything, but they're getting you to understand sort of the DNA of Hermes, right? And a lot of brands are doing this. I honestly don't know if Hermes has a pop-up shop, but even, things like Google opening up a pop-up shop here in New York, to show off like their latest devices. It's an opportunity to sort of learn more about, not necessarily to buy the product, but to sort of become, to sort of step into the water or into the ecosystem of that brand. And then when you sort of get the hooks into you, that sort of gets you more interested in sort of putting them top of mind when you are considering a purchase. Yeah,
that makes sense. So in terms of storytelling, though, seeing as you are doing a lot of the design, right? Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
So, what are some of the more interesting stuff that you're doing in terms of storytelling through design and visuals?
So we've done anything as straightforward as any sort of videos that we produce, motion graphics, or even live videos where you're telling a story through film, etc. But even telling the story solely through visuals, or even having it be like maybe a static image or composition, in a way that's a form of storytelling. If you think about what a story is and how for tens of thousands of years people have used stories to communicate ideas or new things that they've seen when man was sort of wandering around, and they would sit around campfires and tell each other things. People use stories to communicate them. And, even today, parents read to their children, and the stories that they read have profound impact on child's development, not just because it's entertaining or it puts them to sleep, but because there are life lessons within those stories to be learned. So when we employ storytelling in what we do, we try to think about, the basics of storytelling. In our campaign, who are our characters, what's our narrative, components of the story, the start, the middle, the end, what's our goal, how do we want to structure the narrative if we want to be creative with it, and just like how in literature writers will use tone to convey mood, designers have to think of attributes, design attributes, typography, color, in order to cement that story, right? So I gave a presentation internally where we were talking about typefaces and typefaces having distinct personalities. So I had 3 slides, and the first slide They all had Humpty Dumpty on it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you think about the story of Humpty Dumpty, it's something that you would read to a child without thinking. But as an adult, if you sort of read Humpty Dumpty, you can see it's actually really quite dark. It's violent, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's sad.
Mm.
You know, and if you show Humpty Dumpty in 3 different typefaces, it really highlights different parts of the story.
That's
So
interesting.
the first slide, we showed it in Adobe Castellan Pro, which is just a very traditional classical serif. And it looked like a proper story. You can imagine, you know, somebody in the late 1800s, early 1900s reading it to you. A bit formal, right? Classical. The second slide, we showed it in Comic Sans, just, you know, childish and silly, you know, a bit juvenile. But it works because it still is a children's story. And the third slide, we showed it in a very stylized horror type font. I forgot, I think it's called No Fear, but it looks like, you know, something that you would see on like a horror poster from the 1980s. And that made it scary. It made it, you know, terrifying.
Yeah.
And instead of focusing on the, you know, the rhyming or the rhythm of the story of Humpty Dumpty, that typeface alone made you sense, you know, the evil of, you know, that was about to happen to him. So
Yeah.
all those elements really need to come together, I think, when you're using design, or, you know, to tell a story. Same way that art and copy should match. If I have a photograph and it's of, you know, an apple, my copy should not reference an orange. They all sort of need to be working together in order for the story to be successful.